Thank you so much, Ronnie. Thank you to everyone who presented. And I think what the story that's emerging from here and the story that is being woven by those who destroyed agriculture, who are in the next step of telling us how to think about agriculture and food. I was at a meeting earlier with Marina Silva, who used to be the Environment Minister of Brazil and had tried very hard to keep Brazil GMO free. And someone mentioned in that small meeting in this little room that I thought Bill Gates, the worst he was doing was launching Agra in Africa, pushing geoengineering, being part of Climate Smart. But I found out a new thing about him today. That he has a big project, it's an education project, called The Big History. And it's basically about how his kind of people have solved all the problems of the world through their kind of science technology. And he has actually financed a very, very big other program which he calls One Agriculture. And I think this is part of the root problem of industrial agriculture. That it assumes there's one smart man with one smart model with 4 or 5 toxics which keep failing to do the job they were meant to do, and all of them come from fossil fuels. So I call this the fossilized mindset. Because it comes from that age of man as the engineer, the master, the conqueror, nature's deficient fixer. And in fact, because our critique has been so good, so many of the lobbyists, you all know Mark Linus and Matt Ridley, and these people who write for Monsanto. They got together the other day and wrote an eco-modernist manifesto. Now they're saying we have to be ecological, but we have to be modern. And the word modern is always used for destructive agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is always called modern. They don't come and say we're bringing you fossil agriculture. They don't come and say we're bringing you chemical agriculture. We're bringing you industrial agriculture. They always say we're bringing you modern agriculture. We're bringing you modern varieties. So modernity for them is something we should all be clapping at all the time. And I think that's what they don't get. That their linear story, which was, I've got to read that textbook, he's getting taught in every school, because agriculture will be a big part of it. I know it will be a big part because the Newsweek, National Geographic, CNN, BBC, these days have a narrative. The narrative is the world was starving till Mr. Borlaug came along and introduced Green Revolution to India, and suddenly we weren't starving anymore, and this is the first step, and now the next step is GMOs, etc. What's missing in that narrative? First, that Borlaug really did very little. The chemical fertilizers based on fossil fuels were made by the same processes, same scientists, same labs as the labs that were making the ammunition and explosives, poison gas. It was the same set of techniques, and it is what I would call, it wasn't just war technologies, it was technologies that come from an ideology of death and killing. And I think that's the serious issue we are up against. That there is a set of people who get reaffirmed when they get killed. And it's moved from the war into our farms and our plates. And that's what we really have to address at the foundational level. So the Borlaug story was created to say, oh, the Green Revolution removed famine from India. Last time we had famine was 1942. And it was only because the British were taking away half the food as rents, leaving people to starve. It was the period of the war, they needed more and more grain, and that's what triggered so much of our acceleration in our freedom movement and our independence movements. And then they were trying, immediately after our independence, literally in the late 40s and early 50s, to push chemicals on India. And we was, when you're just broken free of slavery, you don't give in very easily. And so there was huge resistance. And it was a drought of 1965, when India needed a little more import of wheat because prices were rising. We weren't dying. Food was becoming a little more expensive, which was troublesome for the government because they were building bigger cities, steel plants, and they needed cheap labor. Villages had no problem. And the US said, sorry, we won't give you we won't give you more wheat unless you change your agriculture. And then the spin masters started to work. Later it was called the Green Revolution. And the only reason it was called green was because it wasn't red. Those were the days. China was rising in red. And they had worked out a very simple narrative. These chemicals will draw farmers into commerce and commercial activity. And they get prosperous. And when they get prosperous, they will become peaceful. They won't take arms to fight for their rights. But the opposite happened in 1984. Punjab erupted in violence. It's the first place where the word terrorism was used in modern times. But it was farmers protesting. And it was later presented as a religious conflict, just like the Syrian thing is being presented, or Nigeria. Any place you look, the degradation of land, the collapse of agriculture is presented as a religious conflict. Who was being kept out? There were no fights between Hindus and Muslims. They were targeting the manager of the dam, the manager of the seed farm. And in their declaration they said, when you do not decide what you grow, how you grow it, you do not decide when the waters of your rivers will be released, you do not decide the price at which your product will sell, you live under slavery and we want freedom. That's what it was all about. That's when I wrote my first book on agriculture, the violence of the Green Revolution, and then decided that day I'm going to now commit my life to the promotion of non-violent farming, an agriculture of peace that makes peace with the earth but also creates peace between people, because we can be watching how this degenerative agriculture is at the root of so much of the violence today. To show the glimpses of people who are moving into Europe. But of course it's only because now they're moving into Europe there is worry. But this kind of agriculture has been creating refugees since it started. And urban slums are refugee camps. Why did people leave their farms? Now, the three things that are very important to remember: they leave their farms because these chemicals and these seeds are costly to buy. And before you know it, you can't afford farming anymore if you're a small farmer. They destroy the land, they make it impossible for you to survive. That's the story of land degradation. Which is why for me, the issue of soil is not just an answer to the climate problem about which every speaker has talked, but it is an answer to survival. Because people are dying because of the death of soils long before a climate extreme hits them. Or they're being displaced from their land as refugees long before a climate disaster displaces them. So, we're looking too much into what the future will do, when today living has been made absolutely unviable for societies that have sustained themselves over thousands of years. I watched this in very fertile parts of India. And then the third bit, which we usually ignore, is that all of this is based on turning agriculture into commodity production, which by its nature must further degrade the soil, because all the cycles that you've been seeing, Francis' presentation, Andre's presentation, of giving back to the earth, that has to be disrupted to extract more. And the nature of the plant has to be changed. So what was the Green Revolution? Take normal plants, which would give you lots of organic matter, and make them dwarfs, so that they can take up more chemicals, and you have a scarcity of organic matter. Your cows have no food, there's no organic matter to return to the soil, and chemical fertilizers become inevitable because of the end of production of organic matter. But that cycle destroys the soil so fast and destroys the farmer, because in the industrial commodity producing cycle, while the farmers always told you to earn more, you learn more, you learn more, farmers are losing everything. My assessments show that 1% goes to the farmer. Whatever you pay, it could be coffee, it could be corn, it could be cotton, it could be potato. The big money and the whole structure of industrial agriculture and globalization are like a vacuum pump, taking wealth out of the villages and the rural areas and farmlands and putting it in the hands of those who don't farm. All they do is either trade. Cargill only trades, biggest grain trader of the world, controls rules of agriculture. Or a Monsanto, which does no breeding, didn't know anything about seed till 20 years ago, but takes a patent and intellectual property rights and sits back like a landlord. But now they're landlords, and the money keeps flowing. The money keeps flowing. And which is the reason I focus so much on the seed issue and not recognizing patents on seed. And you can all go to the Seed Freedom. Go to the Seed Freedom website to see both the movements all over the world, but the Seed Freedom Declaration. Because how you evolve your seed decides how rich your soil will be or how poor it will be. It decides whether your food will have nutrition, or as Hans said, it will be nutritionally empty. It decides whether it will have climate resilience or it will be climate vulnerable. It decides whether there will be greenhouse gas accumulation or the cycle of return. All that lies in the seed. Because all of fossil agriculture begins with breeding seed for chemicals. All of fossil agriculture. And we've been made to believe that there was no breeding till the Green Revolution, and now without GMOs. So the GMO question was the next one. And what do we have after 20 years of commercialization? 4 crops, 2 traits, 4 companies in such a crisis that they have to become fewer. 1987, when I first heard them talk about the future, they said we'll only be 5 because we are too small. Siba was too small, Sanders was too small, they had to get bigger. Now even Syngenta is too small. Monsanto is too small, they tried to buy Syngenta, it didn't work. Now Syngenta, DuPont, Dow are trying to merge. And while they keep saying GMOs are an alternative to pesticides, we're going to reduce pesticides, it's all about more chemicals. Now who's the other player in all of this at this point? The player who is, in my view, the most significant player in continuing the degenerative path is a Mr. Bill Gates. I mentioned his story, what did he call it? The big story. It's got the one agriculture. He's the one who joined up with Mr. Slim of Mexico to work out ways in which information technologies, biotechnologies, all merge into one system of control. So it is when they talk technology, they're trying to blind your mind into not looking at the control factor. See, the other day someone said to me, but are you against technology? I said, how can I be against technology? I evaluate technology. I can be against particular tools that are stupid, like the golden rice or the GM banana, PT egg plant, thousands of percent less than the biodiversity we can use. Or herbicide tolerant and BT crops, stupid because they're not doing the job they were meant for. They're stupid and dangerous together. I think what we have to look at right now is this system that can only think of control and war and death is trying to use the climate discussion to appropriate even more power over the food system. And why do they focus so much on food? Because they know everyone must eat. You run out of money, you're going to not buy a car. You lose your job, you won't buy the fashion clothing. But no matter how poor you are, you need food. And so they've seen this as a very big sustainable market. And the more you can sell linked to that food, the more your power. And so in effect, food has become a carrier of fossil fuels. That's why when I wrote Soil Not Oil, I had a section in it called Eating Oil. We are eating oil. And yes, the work we're doing on the whole soil issue linked to carbon and climate is important. But I think it's so important to link the soil issue to the health of people. Because, most people can't even imagine what farming is like. Most people know there's food, they must eat it. Most food is not so bad, and the data now, I've just launched a new campaign of linking villages and cities, because $300 billion is what India is spending on cancer. There's a cancer train that leaves Punjab. One village outside Delhi has 100 patients, all because of the toxics that come with it. So we are talking about really many, not just storms, it's worse. Between the refugee crisis and the uprooting, between the health crisis, between the deep sense of total hopelessness. And so, for me, the reason this work is so important is because we are not just cultivating food in a way that we enrich the soil with carbon. We are not just cultivating food in a way that we increase water capacity, as Andre showed so very. We are growing more food and better food. And we did an assessment of Navdanya's farms, 200 of them, and we've decided to not measure yield per acre, which is a trick. Because what does yield measure? A monoculture commodity that leaves the land. It is a clear way to never see what goes back to the soil. So it's a clear way to be blind to the nutrition cycle or the hydrological cycle. So we measure two indicators that make more sense. One is nutrition per acre and health per acre, and we could feed 2 Indias. We can feed 2 times the world population by conserving biodiversity, intensifying its use, all the ecological functions that were there in Hans's presentation, taking back the functions of soil fertility, pest control, weed control from business, the toxic fossil chemical business, put it with nature and to be co-creators. And the other one we evolved is wealth per acre. As true cost accounting of how much does it cost? $1.2 trillion is India's externality. Just in social terms, 300,000 farm suicides and damage to every aspect of every ecosystem. And we haven't even taken health into account. I think if we took health into account, we'd have a 2 trillion figure for India. I think it's underestimated what, last time when you had the Commission on Food Security, they talked about 3 trillion worldwide. It's too low. It's too low an estimate. And this is the work we should be doing because we are carrying that burden. So I think we need to make sure we never slip into the language that blinds us and numbs us. That's why I've been very critical of the carbon reductionism. Someone said we do carbon farming. You don't farm for carbon. You can't farm so that the soil is living. You farm to give care, to give love to the earth. So we should talk about farming with care, farming for service. I think it was in your presentation, Hans, where you showed. And it was in the first presentation on who serves what. Because whatever we are doing has to be the serving of the earth, the care for the soil, the care of the seed, the care of the water, the care of the community. And the principles are so clear. It's diversity, it's regeneration, it's the law of return, and it's community. Community both in the soil, community of plants, community of insects, human community. Because what are the two things that if we focus on more and talk about more and infect more people with, that industry just doesn't have the capacity to appropriate. They cannot appropriate the language of love and care. They just can't. So we need to talk much more about that. And they cannot appropriate the imagination of a world of abundance by taking less out of the earth and giving more. They just cannot imagine. That a law of return, the circular thinking, actually is the answer to every scarcity they create and every scarcity they sell to people to make people back. Now, I think we are way past the time where we just talk. You know, I mean, that was the sad thing in their movements. There were some people who talked and other people who farmed. Right? Am I right? Yeah. I think it should be banned. And no one should talk food and agriculture unless they are gardening and farming. Because that's where the responsibility is created. But through the responsibility, power is created. And that's the reason that, you know, at Navdanya, the Bees with Their Feet, and at the farm, we offer this 1 month course. Because people want to learn. You know, a lot of the Parisian journalists ask me, you know, what would I share with people of Paris? I said, instead of bombing Syria, just go and start a garden in the communities where people are feeding the street. And we did plant a garden, but it wasn't in those communities because there's such a divide. People don't even know the people in those sectors. So we need to shift rapidly in the doing of another agriculture. And shifting from a fossil agriculture to agroecology, from monocultures to diversity, from centralization, which is the only narrative in the hands of those who are trying to hijack the agriculture story, to decentralization. From globalization, the trade rules must be very, very big part of this, because the corporations wrote the trade rules. From globalization to localization, and from corporate rule to earth rule and people rule. And from that mentality of death and destruction and killing as power, as superiority, as progress, to care for life, celebration of life, and abundance through that celebration.